3-year wait for Build 42 is almost over, and there's some great stuff on the way. But where will Project Zomboid go next? I have some ideas. So here's a list of 10 features I think we absolutely need to see in Build 43 and why we can't live without them. The list gets progressively more controversial as we go along. But first, let's start with an easy one: maps. Specifically, new maps. And there's a couple of ways that the developers could go about this. The first and most obvious is random generation. And I think that's something that they're already heading towards because they've mentioned they're releasing wilderness random generation with Build 42. So it would make a lot of sense if they continued to develop that into Build 43 to allow a kind of randomized custom map experience. I think that's awesome. But what if we took it a step further and introduced standalone maps of cities around the world? Okay, hear me out. We could even tie this in with infection lore and have the character progress through different DLC maps following the path of infection of the virus. We could start off by having the character visit different cities around the US, and then maybe progressively branching out to cities around the world, trying to find the source of infection. So imagine trying to survive the zombie apocalypse in somewhere like Africa and their weather conditions and animals versus somewhere like Canada with freezing temperatures and bears. There's a financial opportunity here for the developers as well, because if they release this as a paid DLC, it could allow them to increase their budget, which in turn would allow them to hire more people and then get major game updates coming out faster. Next up, we have better building. With Project Zomboid, currently, the building allows for only very basic rectangular building types. And second, zombies are hugely attracted to player structures. Anything a player makes is easily destroyed, while anything pre-built by the devs is pretty much indestructible. But I think if the devs added some slanted roofs, some new building tiles, and then added in some new decorative items like paintings or furniture that players could craft, maybe unique pieces that they need to go out in the world and find, it could be a really fun endgame challenge for people. Which leads me to the next point: traps and base defense. Now, this is a little bit of a controversial topic because the world of Zomboid is supposed to be this place where a zombie could attack your base at any time and you never feel safe. And that works in theory, but in reality, the way the game mechanics work, it's actually pretty easy to overcome the zombie threat in your base. Essentially, all you need to do is build out in the countryside where zombies rarely spawn, or knock down the stairs with a sledgehammer in a 2-story building, which makes your base pretty much indestructible. So I think adding in base traps to the game would allow people to defend their base in less cheesy ways and get a little bit more creative with where and how they build. So stuff like trapdoors, turrets, maybe moats, spikes, I think would add a lot to the game and would be super fun for players to engage with. Now on to improved character customization and textures. I got this idea from one of the comments in my last video, and I would even take this a step further and say that we need more visual character customization that would allow us to make characters tall, short, skinny, fat, muscly, lanky, and anything between. It would be even more amazing if your character's appearance changed depending on their traits. So if they were thin and then they suddenly become obese, that the character would actually become larger and you could visually see that. I think it would be great for immersion in the game and could be super fun to play around with. I also think age is a really important factor here, and starting your character out as a young adult and having them go all the way through life in a zombie apocalypse, eventually dying of old age, in itself could be a huge achievement. Which leads me to the next point. Another thing that I'm surprised nobody brings up is the lack of achievements. One of the biggest complaints that I see people bring up about Project Zomboid is they don't know what to do, which in a sandbox type game happens pretty often. And since there's no overarching goal, people tend to live through the first week, set up their first base, get bored, and move on to start a new character or to another game. It would give something for people to complete, discuss, and share with each other. Like, people are doing this already, maxing out their skills, clearing out some of the most difficult POIs like the prison or the mall. But adding intangible achievements into the game would reward those players for doing that, but also give new players an idea of some endgame goals to pursue. Now we have skills and professions rework. This is another one of those things that I know is talked about a lot. And with Build 42, in case you haven't looked into it, the fishing and farming skills have gotten a big TLC with a bunch of new changes added to it, but there are still a lot of professions in Zomboid that are too tedious to complete or are just not worth leveling. Like tailoring is a perfect example of a skill that is really not fun to level. It provides really good bonuses, but it's such a huge grind and a lot of people just skip over it. In multiplayer, carpentry is a huge issue because it requires you to take apart a lot of items. Personally, I think the skills should be a lot easier to level than they currently are, because in a game with such hardcore survival, it leads players to play in two very different ways. Either people set out to level every single skill, but then they don't want to risk their character, so they never leave the base, or they just decide that skill leveling is not really worthwhile, but if they ignore grinding skills, then there aren't many endgame goals left. Now let's move on to challenge modes. We already have the foundations of this with House in the Woods and You Only Have One Day, but fun, repeatable, objective-based challenges I think would do really great in Zomboid. I'm thinking along the lines of repeatable quests, so stuff like activating radio towers or surviving a wave of zombies for a certain amount of time, or maybe even clearing an entire area. A lot of people struggle with setting their own goals in sandbox games, and having game modes like this allows people to enjoy the game without needing to do a whole bunch of online research. Which brings me to official servers. That's PvP, PvE, and RP. Zomboid is really fun in multiplayer, and a lot of folks out there are searching for others to play with, but it's not so easy without official servers. Now, I'm sure there are a ton of great private servers and Zomboid communities, but they're not easy to find and you don't really know what you're getting into, so it's a risk not everybody is willing to take. Again, this is another thing that the Zomboid devs could charge a small monthly fee for. This would give them another source of revenue to expand their team, and I think it would be great to give players a fun, easy, and safe way to play together. And if you were to combine this with some of the challenge modes, I think it would be pretty popular. Next, we have a nice and easy one, more unique weapon and item variety. And I think this can be broken down into 3 categories. So things like bows, throwing knives, grenade launchers, and grenades themselves. Next, distraction items. So again, we do have some noisemakers and smoke bombs available currently that don't work super well, so nobody uses them. But if we have those items improved and maybe added in some new ones like firecrackers or even those like remote control toy cars to lure away zombies, it could be a pretty fun and different way to play the game. And also armor. So stuff like shields, ghillie suits, and then maybe crafted leather or metal armor. You could have some fun interactions as well, like maybe using a chair as a shield, but I don't know if that's getting too complicated. And lastly, we have zombie evolution or transformation. Now this is another concept that I think would be a fun endgame challenge. Because, you see, the first part of the game is the most fun. There are a ton of challenges thrown at you right away, and then after that, it just slowly dies off. But as your character grows stronger and adapts to their new reality, the world becomes less and less challenging. But what if the zombies evolved and became stronger alongside the player? Maybe they could develop new skills like quiet footsteps so they can sneak up on the player, or become super strong and gain the ability to break through walls, or become some combination of scary sprinters. I think it could be a fun way to challenge survivors and keep them on their toes. Combine that with the ability to build traps, and I think you have a really fun endgame loop. And lastly, human NPCs. Now, I don't think this even needs to be on the list. I think most people are super excited about this one, and pretty much everyone agrees on this. We need friendly NPCs, we need raiders, we need quest givers. NPCs are obviously a must, and I think it's gonna be amazing when they're added into the game. What do you guys think of all this? Is there something that you want to see in the game that I didn't mention? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.